you're still with us at the directors event as we sit in on South Africa's biggest board meeting. I am Nozipho Shabalala, and we are now going into a panel discussion that shines the spotlight on the skills and unemployment crisis in South Africa. And we're asking the question, can tech turn their fortunes around? Now, joining me in this panel discussion, we're going to be joined by Mr. Seleki Tlhabane. He is, of course, the Chief Director of Math Science and Technology at the Department of Education. We also have Riaz Muller standing by. He is the CEO of Hyperion Dev, and they've been doing some fantastic work around transitioning universities onto online courses and online education. Vigala Rankin is with me in studio today. He is the founder of Value Ed and Elevate, and he is putting business and leadership insights into the hands of his clients. Professor Jonathan Jansen is online and joins us in this conversation. Of course, we know he is a distinguished professor of education at Stellenbosch University. And Bernstein joins us in this conversation as well, also joining us online. She is the CEO of the Center for Development and Enterprise, that is the CDE. Hope Lukoto is right here next to me. She is, of course, Chief Human Resources Officer at BCX. We're standing by to have a compelling and insightful conversation about how tech can help us turn our fortunes around. Professor Jansen, I'm going to come to you next, but before I start off, I think just setting the context for this conversation is quite important. If we all consider, for example, the global pandemic that we find ourselves in, I think nobody can deny that it's certainly accelerated digital transformation, not only in South Africa, not only on the continent, but certainly in the world. We're seeing online education as the new normal. We're seeing remote working models as the new normal. Of course, we're seeing brick and mortar businesses moving onto online retail or e-commerce platforms. But this is not the only side of the story that we need to consider. If we take a look and pause and consider some of the stats SA data that just came out, we do realize that there is the risk of a growing disparity between the haves and the have-nots. So on the one hand, we know that if you look at South Africans, and especially the population between the ages of 15 and 24, a third of that population is neither in education or in training or in employment of any form. We also know that more than 20 million South Africans under the age of 35 are unemployed. So we certainly have a skills crisis. We certainly have an unemployment crisis. The big question for this discussion, of course, is can tech help us turn this around? Can we build a workforce that is primed for the fourth industrial revolution if we are able to close the skills gap? And so, Professor Jansen, I'm going to come to you because we have to ask the question of readiness first. Is South Africa ready to take full advantage of this transition towards a tech-driven future?
Thank you very much, Nosipo. And yes, I think South Africa is ready, but the question is ready for whom? And so you're quite right, of course, with those very disturbing, statistics to point out that, you have on the one hand a fairly sophisticated economy, a fairly well-developed technology, ready country, and at the same time, only a small percentage of young people can access those facilities versus the rest. Where you saw it most clearly in my business is in schools and universities since March 2020. So when the lockdown hit, there were about 20% of our schools could transition fairly seamlessly from face-to-face to fully online learning. The rest didn't. And so our research shows that there are enormous learning losses that have accumulated, as a result to the majority population. Why does this matter? Because education is not simply about matriculation, as you know. Education is also about giving you the mindset, first of all, that bloody mindedness with which you are able to access and use technology, but also the basic skill set, that you need in order to do everything from an Excel spreadsheet to engaging on a sophisticated learning platform. And so for me, the big question that we must stare in the face, the elephant in the technology room, is this. how do we create an accessible, accessible access to the majority population, whether it's schools, universities, or those elite, as you call them, those outside of education, training, and employment. How do you provide that in such a way that it is affordable, that it is accessible, and in such a way that we can transform the base of our economy through full participation or near full participation of all young people in the opportunities that technology offers. And unless we deal with that elephant in the room, it will still be a case of the rich getting richer, if you know what I mean, in technology terms.
I do want to maybe take this elephant and take one bite of it. And Anne, I want to maybe bring that bite to you, because what Professor Jansen is saying is putting on the table our education system in its totality. So basic education, higher education. And I want to maybe just take a systemic perspective from your side and say, what needs to be true in order for us to really see that accessibility that Professor Jansen is talking about, have that access for the majority to make use of, so that we really are building a workforce that is not made up of just the 20% that are coming out of institutions that were able to transition during this pandemic?
Well, thanks, Nozipho. I obviously agree with a lot of what Professor Jansen has said. For my money, I would like South African kids in our schools, our learners, to actually learn to read and write and do arithmetic. And the society is failing terribly at doing that. So before we talk about getting ready for the fourth industrial revolution, which we have to do, we need to fix our basic education system. And I don't believe tech is the way to think about that. We have to think fundamentally about system reform and how we make this a much better performing system for the vast majority of the schools. So before COVID, we were in terrible trouble. We were making very, very modest progress, but not nearly sufficient. So South Africa has to really grasp the nettle of basic education reform at a systemic level and stop sort of looking for shortcuts or sort of ideas about computers or tablets or whatever. We've got to think much more systematically about the integrity of the bureaucracy, its effectiveness, the role of trade unions, who runs the education system and for whom, and how we get to be a much, much better performing system overall.
So, Selike, I want to come to you with that, because what we're almost hearing and saying is that let's not put the cart before the horse. Let's go back to the basics. But I would imagine that some of your thoughts is that we've got to do both. And I'd love for you to talk to us about what are the major curriculum changes that are trying to respond to not only the pandemic, but the opportunity that this accelerated digital transformation really represents. But I'd also like you to respond to what we've heard from Anne, from what we've heard from Professor Jansen as well. Where should the baseline be and our starting point? Is it just about focusing on reading and writing, or is it about unlocking the genius of the both and right now?
Thank you very much, Nozipho, and let me also greet my fellow panelists. And yes, I've noted the comments made by Prof. and Annelie. Our thinking as basic education, starting with responding to the comments that they were made, is that it is not either or. For one to understand the education system, you need to understand that historically, there were three basic skills that every citizen needed to acquire for them to be able to function effectively in society. And those skills were mentioned by my fellow panelists, the three skills: reading, writing, and the ability to handle numbers, what we call arithmetic. Because all of us, we require that skill to survive in life and function effectively in society. Recently, there's a fourth skill that was educated and was agreed upon by educationists that it was required and needed by every citizen. And that is what we call the life skill. And we introduced that and taught the life skills through a new subject that we introduced that we call life orientation. We are at the point where citizens require a new set of skills, what are called digital skills. And anybody who does not possess this type of skills will not be able to function effectively in society. And unless you are able to operate machines, your computers, your cell phones, you are able to stand in front of the ATM and be able to speak to the ATM, be able to generate reports on your machine and submit them, you will not be able to function effectively in society. There are those who are arguing, who amongst us is still submitting handwritten reports where they are working? And it brings in this debate around, do you still need to write as in using your hand, or you need to operate a machine to be able to generate your reports? From educational point of view, we say writing is very, very important because it develops other motor skills, and it has been proven that it assists the child to develop holistically. And for us, it is not either or to say you must achieve this first and then you then move to that. We are saying we need to do this concurrently. Learners must learn how to read, write, and be able to manipulate numbers. And they must also embrace the changes that are happening in terms of technology.
Mr. Seleki, let me just do maybe a follow-up question there, because I want to bring back the thread of the disparities that are really coming to the surface between the haves and the have-nots. I think the number that Professor Jansen said, he said only about 20% of our schools were able to transition successfully during the pandemic. And we do know that digital infrastructure, especially last-mile connection, is not a reality for every single school in South Africa. So the question to you is, if we get the basics right, the reading, the writing, the life skills as you're speaking about, what about the additional that we need to be looking at, which is those technological skills? Are those going to be the preserve of the few in the direction that we're moving, or are there really deliberate efforts to make sure that we're not leaving any learners behind as we transition?
The reserve for the few, it's not a new phenomenon. It is something even before technology came in, that the society was divided and that the government of the day is working on addressing those issues, especially the backlogs in terms of infrastructure. Where we come from, it was designed already to create this divide. And I think you would understand that the government of the day has prioritized resourcing of education, that education is receiving the biggest allocation in terms of the budget. This is a demonstration by government that we are committed to addressing these disparities. Yes, I do agree that the pandemic, which has propelled us into this new way of schooling, of education, of delivering education, has also exposed some of these shortcomings. But we are reviewing our funding mechanisms to ensure that we provide these technologies to our children, to our learners. We are working with our sister Department of Communication and Digital Technologies, as well as with mobile network operators, to explore various technologies that can be used to ensure that connectivity reaches to the far-flung areas. For instance, the fiber, which is a challenge that fiber, we need to dig the trenches for it to get to the far-flung areas. That we are exploring other technologies like satellite, for instance, which prove and reach far-flung areas. We do agree that there are those disparities, but we are committed as government to ensure that we will avail these technologies to our teachers and to our learners. There is no silver bullet. We are not promising that it will be done by tomorrow, but there is serious commitment from government to ensure that we close these gaps. And we do agree with my fellow panelists that there are these gaps.
Thank you very much, Seleki. I'm going to move on to Riaz, but I just want to lift from what you've said. One of the things that you're laying on the table is potentially we need a triage approach, that there are certain things that are going to need immediate attention, but there are certain interventions that are going to take a much longer term to fix. And of course, we have to ask the question, what can we do now? And what does have the benefit of being put on the longer term plan? I'll come back to that because I know that Anne has some thoughts on that. But Riaz, you are at the coalface in terms terms of some of the work that you guys have been doing in terms of supporting universities to transition from traditional instruction to online instruction. And that really gives one the real sense of the state of readiness and how many South Africans are really in a position to get the kind of skills that we're talking about. Maybe, Riaz, just maybe if you could share very briefly that experience, what you found in that work, and whether, you know, the tertiary education system is ready to plug the gap of the skills that we say we need in order to turn this tech revolution into an opportunity in the country.
Thank you so much, and great to meet the fellow panelists too. I think that the world we're living in now is similar to after the financial crisis. The financial crisis made people lose trust in banks, and that actually brought about the fintech revolution. You can now bank completely on an app. You don't need to go to a branch. You know, in the UK and in Europe, there are fully digital banks that have 5, 10, 15 million customers. And even in South Africa, we have things like Time Bank. And when you look at the university ecosystem, those institutions have brands that are as strong as banks. And people trust universities. But when it comes to a traumatic event like COVID, where everybody has to transition to online so quickly, and this is not the core competency of the university, we are there to help universities extend their brand and service their students in a way that is accessible. You know, Hyperion, the company that I run, we are one of the largest providers of tech education in South Africa. It was mentioned in the previous panel that, you know, this is an amazing vertical of education to accelerate people into employment as software developers and web developers by having to not go through, you know, a traditional 4-year route. And that speaks to the accessibility of employment and jobs in that space. But what we're trying to do is help university brands not just launch online courses, but also understand how to deliver courses that are perhaps not full degrees, but are still accessible. And that, in the post-COVID world, is a really exciting opportunity for South Africa and for our university partners.
Riaz, a quick follow-up for you there. I mean, what you are proposing does require a mindset shift for on the one level, because we know that as South Africans, sort of traditional university instruction has been elevated as potentially more valuable, whether we are looking at the TVET system, and what you're saying now is that online is the new normal, maybe shorter degree programs than what we're used to. Are you finding that as a citizenry that we are adopting this mindset and we are more open to the idea that even tertiary education in how it's packaged and delivered is never going to be the same again if we want to make sure that we've got the right skills in the time that we need them?
It's about an evolution, and it's about how people perceive products. I used to work as a product manager at Google, and what I worked on was trying to get people to use Google Voice Search, which is hard, you know, to get people to think about searching with their voice and speaking to their phone is a huge mind shift change, but it's also a complicated product. And if you think of the product of a university degree and think about digitizing that, it's an extremely hard challenge, because it's not just an app which you may use for a few hours a month. This is a 3-year-long or a full-time, hundreds of hours of students' investment in time. And to create a product that is good and is an amazing experience comparable to some of the best apps out there is something that's really hard. And that's what people are going to need to see to really trust online education. And the funny thing is South Africa has that. We have edtech startups like Get Smarter and 2U, who provide fully online degrees for some of the most prestigious university brands around the world. We have the talent and people in our country to team up with our tertiary institutions, whether public or private, to help them scale the highest quality online education products. And that's what we need to do in South Africa, and this is the time to do it.
So, Riaz, thank you for that. And what you've been able to do through your contribution is really bring in some of the realities of what's really happening in the educational system. Vigela, one of the things that has come up repeatedly in the panel has been the mindset shift. In addition to that, what has also come up is this idea that the skills that we thought were sufficient for one to participate meaningfully in the labor market are potentially insufficient now. And so I'm keen to understand from you, what is the new skill set that we should be focusing on? But I'd love for you to comment on the mindset shift as well, because you're also in the business of giving people the tools to actually make that leap from this is my current mindset today and this is how I might potentially think differently to make most of the opportunities that are opening.
Thank you, Nozipho. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you to the panelists. No, absolutely. I think, one of the things that we need to understand is that our young people have to transition in this technology age very differently than before. I just think about my time when I was transitioning very simply from, say, for example, a record to a CD. That could take 3 to 5 years. But the kind of technology that's moving now is that, for example, the voice technology that's being referred to that is going to be accessible in all vehicles in the future. It means that for our young people, for them to start thinking about how they start seeing technology as a viable means in terms of for themselves, they need to be given the skills and the ability to start seeing what's possible. And the only way you can start seeing what's possible is if you're able to showcase the possibilities of what technology can give. It's one thing to have the digital literacy, it's one thing to have the qualifications,
right.
And it's another thing to be able to say, how do I take this skill and how do I take these qualifications, utilizing the environment that we have and be able to produce what we need. And so, therefore, when you're talking about skills, the ability to network, and I'm going to talk about slightly different skills, the ability to network is a skill that I think young people need to be, given. And this is a skill that I think when we're looking from an educational system needs to start very, very young. We're going into an age where we're working from home. We're going into an age where we're slightly isolated.
Right.
The ability to have certain levels of resilience.
Yeah.
The ability to connect. How do you utilize connections for collaboration? We grew up in a mindset where competitiveness was the language that was used. And now we need to start inculcating skills of collaboration. Decision-making. How do you make how do you decide on decisions based on certain levels of scenario planning? So I think what's important is one other element that we try to inculcate quite heavily is this element of inspiration. We're going to have to inspire our young people to believe in what's possible. I work with young people who, yes, have gone through the necessary processes of education, but their sense of self, their sense of self-worth is not being heightened to the level of creating these levels of expectation. And therefore, we're in an environment where anxiety has now started kicking in, where young people are experiencing mental health and mental wellness-related elements. So these skills are going to be important to keep people going, but also to believe and also to see where the journey is. I do believe the digital revolution is an amazing place where the level playing field has been created for everybody to have the opportunity to go out there and be able to do what they're capable of. But access and is going to be a critical ingredient.
So Hope, I think we've been building up a narrative to get to you because ultimately it is about jobs. It has to be, all of this needs to lead to a pro-employment future. We've heard from Professor Jansen saying, look, we need to make sure that we are really looking at basic education and whether we're getting everything right. And has come in and says, in addition to this, we've got to put the elephant in the room and we've got to have courageous conversations about that. Riaz is saying, look, mindset shift. And what I'm hearing from Bigela, he says, well, yes, we get the skills, right? But there's also resilience. There's also collaboration. There's all of these things. And the question I want to bring to you is that given the fact that we are sitting with a ticking time bomb now, as you look into the future, are you staring into a future that says we're headed towards net job losses overall, or we are potentially, because of the tech revolution, going to be able to create more jobs that could actually bring in these young people that not only have access, but they have the skills and they have the mindset, to Vigela's point, to make the most of those opportunities. Your crystal ball, what is it saying to us? Where are we going?
Thank you, Nozipho, and thank you to the contribution of the panelists. If I look at that crystal ball, I think really the tech-driven world can create more jobs. We really can rekindle economic transformation if we focus on emergent technologies and skills. The reality is technology is changing at a very rapid pace, including emerging skills like blockchain, artificial intelligence, automation. It's not a question of whether we are ready or not. We have to accelerate. Digital transformation is moving at a very fast rate. McKinsey did a study in 2017 that puts it very nicely, where they are projecting that by 2030, as many as 14% of the global workforce will have to change jobs or acquire new skills because of the result of emerging skills. So if you look at South Africa and you look at the high unemployment rate, you look at the effects of the global pandemic, and you look at the projected economic growth, you can see that we do have a challenge. Therefore, we can't afford to not focus on all of it. Yeah. On the skills that Vikela is talking about, on foundational education skills, we really have to collaborate to get it all so that we can really revitalize the current employee base that we have by equipping them with new skills from these emerging technologies. And the other thing that we got to dispel is the fear that skills will be displaced by automation. Automation will not really displace skills. We're going to look at it differently, that it's going to provide us an opportunity to look at new required skills, at new skills and capabilities that we got to build and enhance the skills and capabilities that we already have. And some of the skills that we should be talking about that we are not highlighting fully is things like design thinking and innovation as a skill and a capability. We got to recognize those things. We do have to create developers and equip them to innovatively solve problems. If we give them platforms from government, from corporate sector, and opportunities, hubs for the youth to go and engage with this technology, we really can unlock a lot of value. We can unlock a lot of entrepreneurial ventures that can participate in the economy and ensure that there's growth. So we have to do both. It can be done, but we have to focus on developing skills and capabilities that are going to drive digital transformation, and we have to accelerate digital transformation as well. We must get very comfortable with technology and become fluent in technology and work hand in hand with machines and promote that we adopt robotics and automation, because it also allows us to think differently about our careers. Like you were saying, the skills that he's talking about, collaboration, etc. Those are skills that automation is not going to take away from us. Yeah. So we must really zoom into problem solving, curiosity, critical thinking will always have a place to play there. And those are the skills that will allow us to create, to build, to innovate, to focus on things where we can really solve problems that affect us on a daily basis, where technology can be that solution that elevates our lifestyle.
So I do want to bring a little bit of complexity in, because on the one hand, we have a challenge of a high supply of graduates coming into the market, whether they're coming from traditional tertiary institutions or TVET colleges or whatever the case may be, coming into the market, potentially with the right skills, looking for opportunities in a range of companies. But you also have an existing workforce that needs to be upskilled, that needs to be reskilled, that needs to open up themselves to lifelong learning. How are you balancing that as business to say, how do we create employment opportunities so that we can absorb some of the labor market entrance, but at the same time realizing that there is internal interventions that need to be considered to upskill and reskill existing talent that might not be fit for purpose right now as the digital transformation takes place?
I think one of the things that we really have to do is to think differently about careers, about jobs. As an individual, one of the things that we are doing at the different stages of our lives is we are learning. We are learning informally, we are learning formally by attending qualifications and certifications. And even as you do your day-to-day job, you are learning. But technology is being so disruptive that even as you're learning, it's continually disrupting jobs and capabilities and the skills that we need. If we zoom in and focus on skills and we move away from looking at job roles, job families, those requirements that are really very narrow and they focus you on a particular stream and you can only follow that stream, we'll open ourselves much wider to where we can upskill and reskill the current workforce. You know, using stepping stone foundational skills. If we look at adjacent skills that people have, what can we build on from the skills that you have so that we add on more that are relevant to where we are headed and where technology is going, that will also open up room for the younger generation to play around with technology, to look at different work streams that they might not have thought of. If I look at the discipline of data science, that can be applied throughout the value chain in the corporate sector. But chances are we think about it in terms of technology only. Technology is going to have to be, those competencies are going to have to be reinvented throughout, not only in technology, in human resources, in marketing, in finance. So digital is really permeating everything that we do. And therefore, if we just revisit it and look and reimagine our definition and our allocation of what we say is a skill and a requirement, and we focus on the outputs and the requirements of a particular project and a job, we'll find that there's a lot in the pool that we can work with to build on to create the criteria that we're looking for.
I want to build on the word that you've used, and I'm coming to you with this because Hope is talking about reimagining. Everything from reimagining careers, reimagining what we consider a job. But Anne, you introduced the elephant and you put the elephant in the room. And I said, in response to that, potentially we need to come in with a triage mindset. There are things that need immediate emergency attention. There are things that we can focus on in the longer term. One of the things in the longer term, of course, is building a workforce that is ready for the fourth industrial revolution. The question to you, Anne, right now is, what can we do today, given the fact that the world is not standing still, digital transformation is moving ahead? What can we do today that really allows us to reimagine all the things we've spoken about in this conversation, but allows us to begin to close this gap quite deliberately?
Look, first and foremost, South Africa has to grow its economy. We have to grow the top end of the economy, which is what I think Hope is talking about, and I support that. But we're incredibly inefficient, unequal society. And if you look at today, we've got to introduce fundamental reforms to grow the economy. And one of those is that we can't skill South Africans unless we bring in foreign skills. Now, everybody wants everyone to be sort of upskilled as quickly as possible. So I am arguing that we have to fix our basic education system. We have to fix our tertiary TVET system, vocational education, which is incredibly expensive and very inefficient and not related to the world of work. But we also have to bring in as many foreign skills as we possibly can. South Africa desperately needs maths teachers. We need people to work in our universities as professors and lecturers to train South Africans. We need medical specialists. We need all sorts of people. So we have to do a number of very big things in South Africa to enable us to really deal with the reality, not the ideal, but the reality of millions and millions of young people who have no chance in our society, who get a terrible education and who can't absorb all of this or participate in this great new world. So we've got to open up labor-intensive manufacturing, and we have to think much more deeply about the overall comprehensive skills challenge that South Africa faces at all levels.
Selike, I'd love for you to respond to that, because what I'm lifting from Anne is she's saying, look, we really need to rethink the role that foreign skills could be playing in South Africa and helping us accelerate while we're still focusing on getting the basics right. We need maths teachers is one of the examples that she used. I'd love your reaction to that. Are we being a tad too nationalistic when it comes to bringing in the required skills that might allow us to accelerate towards the fourth industrial revolution? What are your thoughts on that?
I partly agree with Anne that we need to be realistic, and where we do not have skills here at home, we must be willing to import those skills. But it must be for a defined period of time while we are busy building and growing our own timber. As basic education, as an education system, and education systems across the world have a responsibility to supply the job market with people with requisite skills. And we have begun as basic education the process of policy review that makes room for introduction of new and relevant subjects that are going to teach our children digital skills and all the 21st century skills that my fellow panelists have spoken to: collaboration, teamwork, critical thinking, digital literacy, and all those 21st century skills. Coding and robotics is a way of us responding to the demands of the job market. We acknowledge that the jobs that our children are going to occupy in future are changing, and we are driving our agenda as basic education through a theme that we call building skills for the changing world. So I do agree with Anne that when we do not have the necessary skills, we must be bold enough to import them, but it must be for a defined period of time while we are building our own timber, and we must track how we are doing in terms of production of such skills. And coding and robotics, as part of our policy review, is one way of responding to the demands for the changing world.
Professor Jansen, I want to put on your table the question of priorities. On the one hand, Anne is calling for us to really think about importing skills. We're hearing an endorsement of that idea from Seliki saying, but in addition to that, we've also got to look at policy reviews. We've got to make sure that we get the basics right. I'm keen to understand if you could put the top 3 priorities that you think if we got these 3 things right, we are going to make definitive strides towards a workforce that is primed for the 4th industrial revolution. We're going to be able to definitively close the skills gap, and we're going to make a dent on the unemployment figures. What are those top 3 things that we should be galvanizing around as a country?
Thanks, Josepa. Look, let me be honest with you. I worked in schools every single day, and when you go with me to schools and you talk about 4IR, people will laugh at you because that's not where the most of our schools are, And I have a huge respect for my colleague, Mr. Klabane, but, a government that cannot fix 2,000 pit latrine toilets in the Eastern Cape is not going to give you the platform to develop 4IR. Let's just be honest with each other. So we've got to look at other ways of getting there soon for the sake of our children. The only way out of this, apart from a systemic change at the moment, is public-private partnerships. Yesterday, I talked with one of the partnerships that I'm involved in the rural KZN, and what we've been able to do there, working with the KwaZulu-Natal Department of Education and Toyota, is we have been able to build the basic infrastructure in some of the most rural primary schools in that province. And I wish you could have heard the testimonies of the principals yesterday. They said their lives have been changed because now what you have is priority number 1, a basic infrastructural platform from which you can then move to what Hope very usefully talks about, which is the next level skills, which is problem solving, as she put it, critical thinking, innovating, and the ability to change. You're not going to get there unless you first provide, as I said, that basic platform. So that is for me, and we should get, I agree. By the way, we're already importing foreign skills. If you go to places like Toyandou and you look at Mbilwi School, you go to Soweto, you know what you will find is that the best math and science teachers are from Zimbabwe and India. That is good. I don't know why my colleague wants them here for a defined period of time. Let's keep them here because you're not going to rebuild South African schools, in a short period of time. Let's open our borders, bring in the best technologists, the best teachers, etc. And that is the way you build a strong economy and also a strong skills base for the 21st century.
Professor Jansen, so infrastructure, make sure that we're leveling the playing field in terms of making sure that we don't have dysfunctional sites of teaching and learning, but really giving every learner a chance at curiosity and innovation and collaboration and a range of other skills that you raised as well, Vigela. I do want to come to you, Vigela, because I think at the end of the day, if none of this leads to enhanced competitiveness, if none of this leads to enhanced productivity, we might really be missing the mark. Do you get the sense that we're connecting the dots and we're completing the equation about why we need to get all of these things right and what the so what, if you will, needs to be at the end of this conversation and the end of this journey that we're on?
Yeah, no, we we tend to, and I think it was mentioned earlier by the panelists, get really sort of roped into the technology bit and not asking ourselves a question as to what is the end result of all this. I mean, just to sort of add a couple of things to the answer that I'm about to give. How do we fix this really quickly? We need to create access. We need to create access, and we need to create access. And the access that you referred to earlier on, like creating hubs, is important. There's some occupations, there's some careers right now that are going to be disrupted. When we see what's happening in retail outlets, we know what's going to happen with young people who are working at your Pick and Pays and Checkers, et cetera, et cetera. Those businesses are going to be disrupted. I do think that productivity and competitiveness is possible through this kind of technology, because what we want to be able to see is young people, being able to scale whatever that they do. We want to see them being not just, I know a young teacher who's brilliant at what she does. Right. And I'm saying, don't teach 20 kids, teach 20,000 kids. So let's try and see how we can create scale. In the future of, what you know and who you know is gone, but it's now about who knows you. Yeah. So how do we allow young people the ability to personally brand so that they're able to position themselves and their skills and their capabilities so that they are now competitive and able to play in a market where everybody else is playing? It's no longer also about the big punch in terms of how do I was listening to a young man talk about, trying to get into the corporate world and looking for employment. Employment is important. But it's now about how do I have a skill and how do I have what I have and how do I transition that into a need? How do I take that need, solution it, and how do I commercialize that? It's no longer about sitting and waiting and hoping that somebody is going to come along and give you what you need. So yeah, that's. I love
that. It's not about the big punch. Maybe it's a 1-2 punch now. So
it's a 1-2 punch.
It's a 1-2 punch and a jab. Hope I've got just over a minute, and I do want to just get your voice in here, because what we haven't touched on is the workforce that is now subjected to these new hybrid models of working, the remote working. And we would be making such a grave mistake if we don't acknowledge that this has not been a silver bullet. And in fact, it may be creating different types of inequalities in terms of inequalities within the workforce. How do we make technology in the professional space an equalizer rather than a further differentiator between those who will progress and those who will not?
And remote work has been put up as one of the 5 forces that will be an equalizer in the digital age. And it shares that space with artificial intelligence and mobile and cloud. So it's really big, it's up there. And that's because digital transformation is what's driving remote work. Remote work will provide access to a bigger talent pool, a much wider talent pool. We should be able to actually access more people with disabilities and more women and even more young people, because the space allows for that. We can now focus on the quality of the talent, not the location of the talent. And as we get a more diverse workforce, we get more diverse ideas, and we are able to innovate even much quicker. And those are the things that we got to focus on. It also allows us to reach our customers much quicker in every way. However, it's not an equalizer as yet in South Africa because of access to technology, data, and connectivity. So we got to work at digital transformation and accelerating the digital capabilities that we have to develop to drive the digital transformation.
Well, my screen is flashing and it's saying time is up, Nozip. I do want to take the moment just to thank my panelists for really leaning into this conversation with their insights and their expertise. If there's one big takeaway that I do want to lift, it is about the genius of the both and. We've got to import skills whilst we're building the foundation. We've got to think about mindset shifts while we're also thinking about how we use technology as an equalizer. We do not have the luxury of focusing on just one lens of this problem of skills and unemployment. If we want technology to turn our fortunes around, we've got to unleash the genius of the both and. Thank you so much.